This tutorial is for 5th grade, Module 6, Lesson 3. In this lesson, we're going to continue working on the coordinate graph. The directions say to use the grid to complete the following tasks. We're to construct a horizontal x-axis that passes through points A and B. So you can see we have points A and B at the bottom of our graph, and we're going to create a line that runs through points A and B, and we'll call that the x-axis. So you can see I've put in an arrow along the bottom, and we will label this as our x-axis. The directions for B say to construct a vertical y-axis that passes through points C and F. So I'm going to do the same thing, only this time it'll be a vertical line running through points C and F on the side of the grid. And we'll label that the y-axis. The next directions say to label the origin as 0. So the origin is always in this bottom left corner, and we'll call that the origin, and that will be 0. Part D says the x-coordinate of B, of point B, is 9. Label the whole numbers along the x-axis. So if B is 9, I'm going to work my way backwards and label the rest of the points. Question F says that the y-coordinate of C is 8. C being 8, above it would be 9, and then I'm going to work my way down to the origin. Here we have a new set of questions referring to the same graph. The directions say to consider the points A through N on this graph. Question A says, identify all of the points that have an x-coordinate of 3. Well, my x-axis runs along the bottom of my graph, so I need to find the 3, and then I need to look for any points that have that x-axis of 3, meaning in order to get to the points, I'd have to go over 3 and then up. So if I went over 3 and up, I would land on point M. If I kept going up, I would also land on point N. So both M and N would have an x-coordinate of 3. Now we're going to look for points that have a y-coordinate of 4. So I go up the vertical axis or the y-axis to the 4. I'll go across to see which points I would get to if I went over on the x-axis and then up 4. So that would be point F. To get to F, I would go over 0, up 4. I would get to point E by going over 2 and up 4. I would get to point H by going over 6 and up 4. And I would get to point K by going over 8 and up 4. So those 4 points would have a y-coordinate of 4. Question C says, which point is 3 units above the x-axis and 5 units to the right of the y-axis? So if I think of my x-axis, that's the horizontal line at the bottom. So I'm looking for a point that's 3 units above the x-axis. So if I go above the x-axis for 3, that would give me at point I. Now let's see if it's 5 units to the right of the y-axis. So the y-axis is my vertical axis, and it is 5 units to the right of that axis. So that meets both requirements. It's 3 units above the x-axis and 5 units to the right of the y-axis. So that is point I. Moving on to question D, it says to give the coordinate pair for each of the following points. So I need to find point K on the graph. So we have point K here. Now the coordinate pair would be the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate. So if I start at the origin, I would move over 8 units first. So we'll show 8 as the x-coordinate, and then I would have to move up 4 units for the y. So the coordinate pair for point K is 8, 4. And notice that I wrote the pair in parentheses with a comma separating the two numbers. So that's the standard form for coordinate pairs. Now let's find point I. Well, point I we looked at in the previous question. To get to point I, we went over 5 and up 3. So we'll say 5, 3 is the pair for I. Now let's find point B. Point B was on the x-axis. So we went over 9 to get to point B, but because it stayed on the x-axis, we'll put a 0 for the second coordinate. So we went over 9, but we didn't move up any units. So the pair is 9, 0. Now let's find C. C was on the y-axis. So to get to C, we stayed at 0. We didn't move over on the grid, but we moved up 8 on the y-axis. For question E, we've been given the coordinate pair, and we have to decide what letter is at that point. So the first pair is 3, 2. So we'll start at the origin, move over 3, up 2, and we get to letter M. The second pair is 0, 4. That means I'm not going to move over on the axis. I'm just going to go up 4. If I go up 4, that gets me to point F. The next one is over 2, up 0. So I move over 2, and I don't move up the y-axis. So that's point A. And the last one is 9, 0. So I'm going to move over 9 and up 0. So I don't move up. And again, that gets me to point B. Here's our last set of questions. Question F says, which point has an equal x and y coordinate, meaning I go over a certain number and go up the same number. To find that, I'm going to look for a point that makes a square because I'm going over the same amount and up the same amount. So I'm looking at the graph and I can see that that point is point L. If I connected the L to the x-axis and then to the y-axis, that would make a square. And if you notice, we're at the, if you go down to see the x-axis, we're at 8. And if you go across for the y-axis, we're also at 8. So that is point L. Question G says to give the coordinates for the intersection of the two axes. So where the y-axis and the x-axis meet, and that would be back at the origin. So its ordered pair or coordinate pair would be 0, 0. And another name for this is the origin. And finally, we're going to plot the following points on the grid. I'm going to use a different color here because my grid's getting kind of messy. Okay, so we're going to plot point P at 4, 4. So I'll move over 4 and up 4 to plot point P. Then I'll put Q at 1, 6. So I'm going to move over 1 and up 6 for Q. And then we'll plot point R at over 4, up 1. Over 4, up 1 would be R. And finally, point S is at 0, 1. So I'll stay at the origin. I won't move over on the x-axis, but I'll move up 1 unit on the y, and that is point S.